Kyoto, Japan, October 8th, 1594. The smell hits you first, burning wood, thick oil, and something worse, something human. The crowd presses in not out of celebration, but out of the same dark instinct that makes people slow down at car crashes. Merchants, farmers, samurai, monks. They stand shoulder to shoulder, silent, breathless, waiting for horror. In the center of the execution ground sits a monstrous black cauldron. Not symbolic, not theatrical, real, massive, filled with boiling oil. Steam curls upward like ghostly fingers clawing at the autumn sky. And before it kneels a man and his child. The man is broad-shouldered, bound face streaked with soot and blood. But it's the boy that steals your breath. Maybe 7 years old. Barefoot. Shaking not from cold but from terror. He clutches his father's robes, unaware that in moments they will both be lowered alive into that cauldron feet first. This is not an execution. This is a message. You're about to witness one of the most horrifying public deaths in Japanese history. But what makes it unforgettable is not the method, it's the man. Ishikawa Goemon. Outlaw, ninja, folk hero, and father. His final act will burn into the minds of every witness, not because he screamed, but because of what he held on to until the very end. But before you see that moment, before the oil starts bubbling with flesh and defiance, you need to know how he got here. How a man with nothing became a legend, and why his death still haunts Japan 4 centuries later. Let's go back to where it all began. Before Ishikawa Goemon became a legend, before his name echoed across Japan like a whispered rebellion, he was just a boy. The year was 1558. Japan bled under the chaos of the Sengoku period, the age of warring states, a time when honor meant survival, and survival often required betrayal. Feudal lords clawed for power while peasants starved. Castles rose and fell with each passing season. It was a world built for warriors and designed to crush the innocent. Goemon was born into this firestorm. His birth name, according to some accounts, was Sanada Kuronoshin. He was the son of a low-ranking samurai Ishikawa Akashi, who served the Mori clan in the mountainous Iga province. Life was harsh but structured. The boy was taught discipline, swordsmanship, loyalty. He likely dreamed, as all samurai sons did, of earning glory in battle, of defending his clan, of dying with honor. But fate doesn't respect dreams. One night when the boy was just 15, the world shattered. The Ashikaga shogunate, desperate to stamp out potential resistance, sent agents into Iga under cover of darkness. They came like shadows, quick, silent, and merciless. Goemon awoke to the screams of his mother, the clash of steel, the rush of footsteps on polished wood. He ran toward the noise, but by the time he reached the main room, it was too late. His father lay dead, his body torn open, blood still warm on the tatami mats. His mother gone, taken or slain, he never knew. All that remained was silence and the smell of death. Goemon, just a boy, stood alone in the ruins of his family. He picked up his father's blood-stained katana with trembling hands. Not to avenge, not yet, only to hold on to something. Because when everything else is stripped away, all that's left is steel and rage. That night, Sanada Kuronoshin died and something else was born. Something harder, angrier. A boy with no family, no name, and nothing left to lose. But he would not wander blindly. He headed into the mountains of Iga, where myths said a hidden school existed, a place where the shadows were sharper than blades, and silence was deadlier than armies. It was there that he found Momochi Sandayu, one of the most feared and respected ninja masters in Japan. To the world, ninja were rumors, ghosts, assassins, spies, who slipped through walls and vanished into mist. But to Goemon, this school was salvation. Here among stone paths and hidden tunnels, he learned to make his body a weapon. He was trained to climb sheer walls without sound, to kill without being seen, to become part of the darkness itself. And he was good. Too good. His grief made him fearless, and his anger made him focused. In time, he became one of Sandayu's most promising students. But Goemon was never meant to be obedient, not for long. They say he fell in love with one of his master's concubines. History doesn't record her name, only that she was beautiful enough to risk everything for. The affair was secret, brief, doomed. When Momochi Sandayu discovered it, there were only two options, death or exile. Goemon chose exile, but he didn't leave empty-handed. Before fleeing the compound, he stole something, a legendary sword forged by masters, its blade humming with a quiet, dangerous light. Taking it wasn't just a betrayal. It was a declaration, a message that he would not return, that he would forge his own path, even if it meant burning every bridge behind him. From that day on, he was no longer Sanada Kuronoshin, the samurai's son. He was Ishikawa Goemon, a nukenin, a rogue ninja, a man with no clan, no master, no place in society, a man outside the law and outside honor. To be a nukenin in feudal Japan was to be hunted. Stripped of your name, your status, your humanity, you were fair game to any warrior, any bounty hunter, any lord seeking favor with the authorities. Most nukenin didn't last long, but Goemon wasn't like most. He disappeared into the forests and backroads of Kansai. He re-emerged years later with a new purpose and a new reputation. He was no longer just a fugitive. He had become a ghost in the night, a thief who robbed the powerful, a figure whispered about in market stalls and inns. And for the poor, he was more than a thief. He was a symbol. What began as vengeance was evolving into something larger. Goemon had lived through loss, betrayal, and exile. He had seen how power devoured the weak, how the rules of honor were written by those with gold and armies, and he had learned on blood-soaked floors and in silent mountain halls that the only justice worth believing in was the one you created yourself. The boy who held his father's sword is long gone. Now there is only the outlaw, and soon the legend. He should have died a samurai. Instead, he became a ghost. After the night his family was destroyed, Goemon, still known as Sanada Kuronoshin, did what no samurai was supposed to do. He vanished into the mountains instead of seeking an honorable death. But he wasn't running from shame. He was running towards something more dangerous, the shadows. The mountains of Iga were whispered about across Japan, a place of fog and secrets, home to a brotherhood that operated outside the codes of Bushido. To the world, they were myth men who could vanish into smoke, kill with poisoned breath, walk through walls. But to those who dared seek them out, the Iga ninja were very real and very deadly. Sanada Kuronoshin arrived at their doorstep as a boy with blood on his hands and vengeance in his heart. He had no title, no future, nothing but a name, a sword, and the will to survive. That was enough. The man who accepted him was Momochi Sandayu, one of the most feared ninja masters of his time. To outsiders, he was a phantom. To his students, he was both god and judge. Cold, ruthless, brilliant. Sandayu didn't care about birthright or honor-only results. If Kuronoshin could endure the pain, if he could learn to become nothing, then he could become one of them. And he did. The training was brutal. Days without sleep, nights hanging upside down from rafters to learn silence, climbing stone walls barefoot, navigating pitch-black tunnels, learning the art of killing not with rage but with calculation. The boy who once shook holding his father's sword learned to move like water strike, like lightning, and disappear before the scream. But the most dangerous lessons were not physical. They were mental, psychological. The ninja were not just assassins, they were infiltrators, manipulators, chameleons. Their mission was not to fight like warriors, but to destabilize from within. They had no loyalty except to the mission, no emotion except what could be weaponized. That was where Kuronoshin began to break. Because despite everything, despite the blood and silence and pain, he still had a heart. They say he fell in love, not with a noblewoman or a princess, but with a concubine of his master. Her name is lost to history, but her presence changed everything. Perhaps she was kind in a way no one else had been. Perhaps she was the first to look past his training and see the broken boy inside. Or perhaps it was something simpler, a moment of humanity in a world built to strip it away. Whatever the reason, it was a mistake. Their love was forbidden. Not by law, but by something worse, the code of silence. Ninja were not meant to love, not meant to form attachments. Emotion made you weak, vulnerable, predictable. And when Sandayu found out there was no trial, No negotiation. There were two choices, exile or execution. Goemon chose exile, but he didn't leave empty-handed. The night he fled the Iga compound, he stole something sacred, a sword of legendary craftsmanship said to have been forged in the heart of a volcano, quenched in the blood of warriors. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol, a personal gift from the shogun to Sandayu himself. Taking it was more than theft, it was betrayal, a declaration of war. In one night, Goemon went from elite disciple to Nukenin, a runaway ninja, a title that made him a walking death sentence. Ninja didn't forgive. The price of defection was paid in blood. He was now hunted by the very people who had trained him. Most Nukenin didn't last a year. But Goemon, he vanished. For a time, he became a rumor, a shadow without a face. No one knew where he'd gone. Some said he'd died in the forests of Ki. Others whispered he had killed his pursuers and taken their names. But years later, when stories began to circulate about a masked thief striking at merchants and temples in the Kansai region, leaving behind bags of rice for widows and silver for beggars, the older generation began to wonder, had the ghost returned? The sword he had stolen, that blade of betrayal, would reappear, flashing in the moonlight as a symbol of rebellion. And the man who wielded it, no longer the boy who once sought only survival. He was something else now, something more dangerous. He had become Ishikawa Goemon. But what made him terrifying wasn't his skill. It was what he had learned in the shadows, how to dismantle power quietly, how to move through the cracks of empire. He didn't fight armies, he fought systems. And he had already lost everything that could be taken from him. That's what made him fearless. And it's what would one day lead him to Toyotomi Hideyoshi's doorstep sword, in handfire in his heart, and a death sentence already written. But that story comes later. For now, remember this: legends are not born from light. They are born in the darkness, forged in exile, sharpened by heartbreak, and tempered in silence. Goemon's fall from grace wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything. It always starts the same way: a quiet street, a moonless night, a mansion wrapped in silence and silk. Inside, a merchant sleeps soundly beneath embroidered blankets, his dreams heavy with profit and gold. Outside, in the stillness just before dawn, a shadow moves across the rooftop, fluid, deliberate, silent as smoke. By the time the merchant awakens, it's already too late. There's a blade pressed to his throat, a whisper in the dark: your money, or your legacy. The shadow's name, Goemon. But this is not the same man who fled the Iga Mountains. This is someone different, sharper, colder, more focused. He doesn't kill for revenge anymore. He steals for something bigger. He steals for the forgotten. By the early 1580s, Goemon had transformed into more than a fugitive. He had become a myth in motion, a name carried in whispers across the Kansai region. Where power flowed like a river from temples, merchants, and lords, he was the storm that struck against the current. A rogue, a phantom, an outlaw who didn't take for himself but gave to those who had nothing left to lose. It was never about the gold. It was about the message. In a society where wealth determined your worth and birth sealed your fate, Goemon tore through the system with silent fury. He targeted the fattened merchant class, those who profited from war and peasant labor. He broke into their homes without a trace, stole their treasures, and vanished before dawn. And yet what made him legendary wasn't the theft, it was what followed. Come morning, in the poorest villages of Osaka and Kyoto, strange things would happen. A bag of rice left on a widow's doorstep. Silver coins tucked into the straw sandals of a beggar. Medicine delivered to a sick child whose parents had lost everything. All of it paid for with gold stamped with the merchant's seal, evidence of a theft that had become an act of defiance. These weren't accidents, they were statements, and the people understood. Goemon wasn't just stealing wealth, he was reclaiming dignity. He was returning what had been extracted, not just money, but power, hope, control. For the first time in their lives, the poor saw someone stand against the untouchable. And he did it without permission, without armor, without an army. Just a blade, a message, and the memory of what had been stolen from him. The rich, of course, were furious. They hired guards, they offered bounties, they demanded the authorities act. But Goemon was always one step ahead. He wasn't fighting in the streets, he was slipping through walls. For every plan to trap him, he had already found the exit. For every locked door, he carried the key. He had learned from the masters, and now he turned those lessons against the very class that profited from blood. But not everyone hated him. To the poor, he was a hero. To the children, he was a bedtime story, the man who steals from monsters and feeds the hungry. To the desperate, he was a promise. One day someone will come for us too. The legend grew fast, but it was also dangerous. Because when stories rise too high, they cast shadows on those in power, and power hates to share a spotlight. One man watched all of this with growing unease, a man whose path mirrored Goemon's, but whose ambition took a darker turn. Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Born to a peasant family, he had climbed to the highest seat in the land. While Goemon moved through the alleys, Hideyoshi ruled from palaces. Where Goemon stole from the rich, Hideyoshi became the rich. Where Goemon gave everything away, Hideyoshi collected everything he could hold. They were opposites, and yet they were the same. Two men born into nothing, both determined to rewrite their fate. But while Goemon chose rebellion, Hideyoshi chose order, and order cannot tolerate chaos. Hideyoshi understood something the nobles didn't. Goemon wasn't just stealing gold, he was stealing loyalty. Every act of generosity bought the hearts of the people. Every coin left in a child's palm was another dagger in the illusion of elite benevolence. Goemon wasn't undermining wealth, he was undermining control. Worse still, he wasn't asking anyone for permission to exist. That made him dangerous. And so the hunt began not for a thief, but for a symbol. Hideyoshi's empire couldn't afford heroes who weren't appointed. If Goemon was allowed to live, then others might rise behind him. Poor men might stop fearing their lords. Children might grow up believing justice doesn't always wear armor. And so a new kind of war was declared, not with swords, but with silence, with rumors, with spies. Goemon felt the net tightening, but he didn't run, because Goemon knew something Hideyoshi didn't. Legends don't hide, they rise. And if he was going to fall, it would be loud enough for the world to remember. He was born in the mud, raised without a name, without a sword, without a future. And yet, he became the most powerful man in Japan. Toyotomi Hideyoshi was proof that you didn't need noble blood to rule an empire, only ambition sharp enough to cut through 1,000 years of hierarchy. But the climb changed him, and what he built, he would destroy anything to protect. By the 1590s, Japan, long fractured by warlords, assassins, and ambition, had been forcefully stitched together under Hideyoshi's iron grip. He was a master strategist, a political spider who wove loyalty, marriage fear, and gold into an empire. A former peasant who had once swept castle floors now sat on a throne of silk, issuing commands that could level mountains or raise armies with a whisper. To the world, he was a miracle. To his enemies, a nightmare. To himself, a god in the making. But here's the truth no one dared speak aloud. Hideyoshi didn't want peace. He wanted obedience. That's what made Goemon dangerous. In every village where gold mysteriously appeared, in every whisper of a thief who stole only to give, it wasn't just theft. It was an insult, a challenge, a reminder that somewhere out there a man existed who had nothing and yet took everything Hideyoshi feared, losing admiration, legend, loyalty, not paid for in coin, but earned in fire. Hideyoshi couldn't allow that, because rebellion doesn't begin with armies. It begins with hope. And Goemon was feeding it like wildfire. He had grown too bold, too mythic, too beloved. Peasants wept for him. Merchants cursed his name in fear. Even children began to see him not as a criminal but a hero. And Hideyoshi, the man who had unified a nation, suddenly found himself at war with an idea, a legend that slipped through walls and into hearts. But Hideyoshi was not a man who tolerated stories he didn't write. He began tightening his grip. Harsh laws, brutal crackdowns. The outlaw Goemon became Japan's most wanted man, but what Hideyoshi really wanted wasn't his body. It was his symbol, his rebellion. his defiance. Because every act of charity Goemon made, every rice bag, every silver coin, mocked Hideyoshi's New World Order. It suggested something no emperor could forgive, that justice could exist without permission. And then, everything broke. According to legend, Goemon's wife, Otaki, was captured by Hideyoshi's agents. Some say she was executed. Others say she died protecting their son. Either way, she was gone. And with her death, Hideyoshi made his first real mistake. He turned a legend into a martyr, and a thief into a man with nothing left to lose. What followed was no longer crime. It was war. Goemon plotted one final mission, not to steal gold or strike fear, but to plunge his blade into the heart of the empire. His target, the emperor himself, Hideyoshi. But this wasn't just revenge. This was a message to everyone watching. You can rise from nothing. You can strike at kings. You can remind the world that tyrants bleed too. The irony, Hideyoshi would have admired him if they weren't enemies. Because in Goemon he saw a reflection. Both men were forged by suffering. Both clawed upward with fire in their bellies. But where Hideyoshi chose the castle, Goemon chose the street. Where Hideyoshi built order, Goemon birthed chaos. Their clash was inevitable. It was the collision of two worlds, one draped in silk, the other cloaked in shadow. One believed in control, the other in conscience. And for Hideyoshi, that made Goemon unforgivable. Not because of what he stole, but because of what he represented. A future that didn't need emperors. So when Goemon was finally captured after his failed assassination attempt, Hideyoshi could have simply executed him. Quietly. Cleanly. But that wasn't enough. He needed a warning. He needed a spectacle so horrifying it would burn the myth from memory. And so he chose the cauldron. Boiling oil. Death in front of a crowd. Not just Goemon, but his son too. A brutal message carved into the skin of history. If you challenge the empire, we will destroy not only you, but everything you love. But history has a way of turning cruelty into courage. And in trying to crush the legend, Hideyoshi immortalized it. Because the people didn't forget Goemon. They remembered the man who stood silent in the flames, the father who held his son above death, the thief who fought not for gold but for justice. And though Hideyoshi ruled Japan, Goemon won their hearts. Imagine this. A full moon hangs above Fushimi Castle like a white eye watching everything. The corridors are silent, carved from polished wood, and guarded by warriors who believe themselves untouchable. Deep within Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the most powerful man in Japan sleeps. But he is not alone. From the shadows a ghost emerges. His name is Ishikawa Goemon, and tonight he carries death in his hands. Every breath is calculated. Every step a prayer. He is dressed in black skin smeared in ash, moving like a shadow through a labyrinth of power. This is the moment, the mission that will define his legend. But he's not here to steal. He's here to end tyranny. He slips past guards like mist. He knows their routines, their weaknesses. His training as a ninja, once buried beneath years of outlaw rebellion, now pulses in every motion. He climbs walls, crosses courtyards, ascends staircases in silence. And then he reaches the chamber. Hideyoshi sleeps just feet away, unaware that justice has crept into his bedchamber like a whisper from hell. Goemon draws his blade. It is the same sword he stole years ago, the one that branded him in exile. Tonight it glows in the moonlight like a piece of vengeance forged in fire. One thrust. That's all it would take. One heartbeat to end the empire. He steps forward, and fate betrays him. His foot catches a bronze bell, delicate, ceremonial, meaningless. Except now it rings like thunder. In seconds the spell is broken. Torches flare. Doors slam open. Soldiers flood the room with drawn swords. And there stands Goemon, blade raised, cornered, and utterly defeated. Across the chamber, Hideyoshi rises slowly. Not with panic, but with chilling calm. He stares at the assassin who dared enter his fortress, and for a brief moment, something strange flickers in his eyes. Not fear, not anger, almost admiration. So he says quietly, the great Goemon finally shows his face. Goemon says nothing. He lowers his sword not in surrender but in resignation. The mission has failed, but his war, his defiance is far from over. He is taken in chains, paraded before the court. Fushimi Castle is silent as he stands trial, not truly a trial, but a ritual of humiliation. His crimes are listed: banditry, treason, attempted regicide. Most would tremble. Goemon does not. When asked how he pleads, he looks Hideyoshi in the eye and answers without fear, "I am guilty of everything you accuse me of. I stole from those who feast while children starve. I raised my hand against a tyrant, and I do not regret it." The room gasps. But Goemon isn't finished. If that makes me a criminal, then I wear it with pride. If justice is treason, then I am proud to be a traitor. Kill me if you must. But know this, more will come. You cannot boil away an idea. It's the kind of defiance that cracks through centuries. Even Hideyoshi, cold and calculating, doesn't flinch. But inside something burns. This thief was supposed to die as a warning, not rise as a martyr. And so Hideyoshi decides, death is not enough. This man, this symbol must be broken. The sentence, boiling. An execution so horrific, so rare, it hadn't been used in generations. But Hideyoshi wants the world to watch, wants them to smell the oil, hear the screams, feel the fear. And then he adds one more punishment. Goemon's 7-year-old son will die with him. The court gasps. Even the most hardened samurai flinch. It's beyond cruelty. It's personal. Goemon's composure cracks. For the first time, his face trembles. The boy is innocent, he pleads. He carries your name. Hideyoshi replies coldly. And your rebellion. There's no appeal, no mercy. The night before the execution, Goemon sits in his cell with his son curled beside him. The child does not cry, but his tiny voice breaks the silence. Papa, are we going to die? Goemon can't lie. Not now. He nods. Will it hurt? Another pause. Yes, he whispers. But I'll be with you. I won't let go. In the final hours of his life, the outlaw writes a death poem, a Japanese tradition. But this is no ordinary poem. It's a prophecy. Though you may boil a thief's body, you cannot boil away his spirit. Thieves will always rise as long as the rich feast while the poor starve. This is not just the end of a man. It's the beginning of a legend. The next morning, the cauldron waits. The crowds gather, and Hideyoshi watches from a gilded platform, convinced he's won. But history will remember what happens next, not as punishment, but as the purest act of love and defiance ever witnessed. And it all begins with a father's hands, lifting his son above the flames. The final act, love, defiance, and immortality. The execution ground at Nanzenji Temple is still remembered, not for the fire, not for the oil, but for what a father did when faced with the unimaginable. It is dawn, October 8th, 1594. The air is thick with smoke, sweat, and dread. Thousands have gathered, not just peasants, but merchants, monks, samurai. Even Toyotomi Hideyoshi himself sits on a raised platform watching coldly. Before the great iron cauldron, the condemned appear: Ishikawa Goemon, legendary thief, outlaw, rebel, and his 7-year-old son. Their feet are shackled, their robes soaked in sweat. The cauldron bubbles, hissing like a living thing. Inside, boiling oil. Death is certain. Agony is guaranteed. But what happens next, no one could predict. As the executioners approach to separate father and son, Goemon does something that history would never forget. He lifts the child above his head, arms straining against the weight muscles trembling beneath rusted chains, and shouts, "If you must take our lives, then take mine first. Let the boy die quickly. Let him not suffer." The crowd gasps. This isn't defiance. This is something deeper. Love, in its rawest, most brutal form. The guards hesitate, but Hideyoshi gives the order, "Proceed." The chain begins to lower. Goemon's feet touch the surface of the oil, and the pain is instant, inhuman. He screams, body convulsing, skin blistering, but his arms stay high. He holds his son above the fire. The oil reaches his knees, his waist, his chest. Each inch is a death sentence. The boy wails, but still he is not burned. His father will not let go. And then when Goemon knows he cannot last another moment, he does the unthinkable. In one final motion, he plunges the child down into the cauldron, fast, fierce, merciful. The scream stops. Death comes instantly for the boy. And Goemon, body breaking, lifts his son's corpse back above the flames like a flag of pain, of rebellion, of unbreakable love. Then silence. Goemon sinks into the oil, still clutching his son. That image burned into the eyes of every witness became more than history. It became myth. We often talk about what makes a man a hero. Is it his victories, his titles? Or is it something else entirely? Goemon never ruled a kingdom. He never commanded an army. He died a criminal in the eyes of the state. But in that moment, in that final act, he embodied something far more powerful than law. He became a symbol, not just of defiance against tyranny, but of a truth deeper than politics, that some things are worth more than life. That love, when pushed to its limits, becomes something eternal. That even in the face of unimaginable cruelty, a human being can still choose dignity. In the aftermath, Hideyoshi believed he had won. That fear would replace Goemon in the hearts of the people. But he was wrong. The story spread like wildfire from village to village, whispered in homes, sung in poems, painted in theater masks. Goemon's legend grew, and not just as a thief, but as a father, a rebel, a martyr. Kabuki plays portrayed him with superhuman strength. Woodblock artists painted him standing in the flames, unburned. Bathhouses across Japan began calling their tubs Goburo, Goemon's cauldron, as if bathing in heat could cleanse the spirit the way Goemon's death had cleansed his name. He was no longer just a man. He had become immortal. And that's the lesson. Not just for history lovers, not just for those fascinated by samurai and ninja and feudal Japan, but for all of us. Because whether you're a single father in Ohio, an overworked teacher in Arizona, or someone sitting alone in a dark room wondering if your life means anything, Goemon's story matters. It reminds us that the powerful often write the laws, but the powerless write the legends. That love, when tested, can become a weapon stronger than any sword. And that even in defeat, there is a kind of victory that no tyrant can ever erase. Goemon lost everything: his home, his family, his life. But he gave the world something that no empire could destroy: a mirror. One that asks each generation the same question. When injustice surrounds you, will you submit? Or will you resist? It's not an easy question, but neither is the life Goemon chose. He didn't die to win. He died to remind us what's worth fighting for, and sometimes what's worth dying for. If this story moved you, if Goemon's final act stirred something deep in your heart, don't let it end here. Leave a comment and tell us what you would have done in his place. Save this video to remember the power of love and resistance, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories that history tried to bury. Every like, share, and voice in the comments helps keep legends like this alive. Because sometimes the past isn't just a memory, it's a message, and it needs to be heard.